Good afternoon and welcome everyone. It is a privilege to open today's Is ASEAN Ready to Advance its Regional Cross-Border Electricity Initiative, brought to you by Institute for Essential Services Reform, ISR. This session is designed to provide in-depth insight into cross-border electricity integration and facilitate discussion among experts and professionals. For today's webinar will be moderated by me, Taskia Haryanto, Climate Action Officer of ISR. We're excited to have an enriching discussion ahead and encourage you to actively participate and share your thoughts throughout the session. To give you an overview of today's session, we will begin with an opening remarks by Arif Rosadi, Climate and Energy Diplomacy Program Manager of ISR. Then, we will proceed with presentation session for 45 minutes moderated by Benita Sasia, Climate and Energy Diplomacy Program Officer. Our first speaker, Nadila Shani, is a manager of power generation and interconnection of ASEAN Center for Energy. Following that, our second speaker, Dr. Tang Do, a fellow in the Zero Carbon Energy for Asia Pacific Environment and Development Program of Australian National University. Lastly, we will hear from our third speaker, Mirza Huda, a lead researcher energy and climate from ICS, Yusuf Ishak Institute. After that, we will have an interactive Q&A session for another 45 minutes, where you will have the opportunity to engage with our speakers. Finally, we will conclude with a summary of key takeaways and closing remarks. We encourage you to stay until the end to make the most of the session. Now, to officially start our agenda, please welcome Arif Rosadi for the opening remarks. Arif Rosadi, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Taskia, for the opportunity. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to ISR Regional Webinar. Is ASEAN ready to advance its cross-border electricity initiative? Distinguished guests and colleagues, in a many way, it is undeniable that we are in the middle of climate crisis. Last year, the World Meteorological Organization (WMO) confirmed that global average temperature exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial level in 2024, marking the first year to breach this climate threshold. It means we are combating with a time and effort to meet a Paris Agreement target to hold global temperature increase to well below 2 degrees Celsius, about pre-industrial levels, and pursue effort to limit to it to 1.5 degree above pre-industrial level by 2000, 2100. Alarm has been addressed. The first global stocktake in 2023 concluded that the world is not on the track to limit global warming to 1.5 degree target. Even with all mitigation action, the world will reach 2.1 to 2.8 degrees Celsius. As follow, the global stocktake suggests several important goals. Two of most significant are: the first is transition away from fossil fuel in the energy system to achieve net zero emission, and the second is tripling up renewable energy and doubling down energy efficiency by 2030, with a target to achieve 11 terawatt globally. Achieving this energy sector decarbonization is crucial to tackling climate change due to its contribution to global emission. According to IPCC assessment report 6 in 2023, the energy sector contribute around 79% of GHG emission. In that regard, it is clear that we need to accelerate renewable energy deployment, and it is expected to be reflected in the new second NDC this year. In the ASEAN context, our region is on the path toward becoming the epicenter of growth, with its GDP expected to triple from 3.1 trillion USD in 2021 to 10.5 trillion USD in 2050. However, this outstanding economic projection, treated by the impact of climate change, both economic and economic losses. For non-economic losses, our region has to deal with highly vulnerable to sea level rise and coastal inundation, increasing the number of extreme events, also impact on crop productivity and biodiversity. For economic losses, according to the research on the impact of climate change on economic growth in ASEAN region, ASEAN has potential to lose 30% of GDP by 2048 due to climate change impact. Based on that information, it is clear that climate change and energy transition should be ASEAN priority. As population and economic growth continue to rise, ASEAN total final energy consumption is projected to increase consistently. And according to ASEAN Energy Outlook, by 2050, regional energy consumption is expected to reach 2.6-fold increase from 2022 level. It means our region will require abundant energy resource for economic development. The challenge is regional energy profile is still dominated by fossil fuel, particularly coal. And without a rapid transition from fossil fuel to renewable energy source, it will put our region in carbon lock-in situation and will increase the chain of economic losses due to climate change. One of existing regional efforts that we can push is optimizing the ASEAN power grid with the high share of renewable energy as primary source. As regional initiative, ASEAN Power Grid aim to integrate its electrical network regionally, which is expected to facilitate electricity trade, strengthen grid resilience, and enhance electricity trade. This regional initiative also can enhance sustainable energy security through improving electricity connectivity project, and it is possible the source of electricity come from renewable energy due to its abundant potential. And according to IRENA report in 2022, the ASEAN regional has a renewable energy potential about 17 terawatt, and it is feasible to deploy it in terms of technical aspect and economically. However, to optimize the ASEAN power grid, our region has faced several challenges or barriers. And according to the paper that was written by Dr. Tang and his colleague, Professor Paul Burke from Australian National University, there are several barriers that need to be solved: political, technical, institutional, economic, environmental, and social barriers. Based on that, Institute for Essential Service Reform organized regional webinar to discuss the important question: is ASEAN ready to expand its cross-border electricity initiative? And this is also an important issue because Malaysia as an ASEAN chairmanship in this year also highlight ASEAN Power Grid as one of priority issue. To answer that question, we have three experts here that will share some thought and idea regarding the issue. The first, we have Ibu Nadhila Sani, Manager of Power Generation and Interconnection from ASEAN Center for Energy. And second, we have Dr. Tang Du, Fellow in the Zero Carbon Energy for Asia Pacific Environment and Development Program, Australian National University. And the third, we have Mirza Sadakat Huda, Lead Researcher Energy Climate from ISEAS Yusuf Ishak Institute. Ibu Nadila, Dr. Tang, and Mirza, thank you for coming. And without further ado, I will stop here and I hope we can answer that important question. Thank you, and I will back the floor to Taskia.
Thank you, Arif Rosadi, for the opening remarks and setting the context. Now, to officially start our discussion, I'm pleased to hand over the session to our esteemed moderator, Benita Saskia. Benita Sasha, please take the session.
Thank you, Toskia, for opening this webinar and Arif Rosadi for setting the context. Good afternoon for our dearest regional participants. My name is Benita Sasha, Climate and Energy Diplomacy Program Officer at the Institute for Essential Services Reform, IESR. And I will moderate this webinar titled Is ASEAN Ready to Advance its Regional Cross-Border Electricity Initiative? In today's sessions, we already have our speakers here. Now, what is going to happen during the next 45 minutes? We will have presentations from Nadila Shani on recent policy updates on ASEAN Power Grid Enhanced MOU, latest updates on the BIM, PIP, and subsea cable framework, and then on to Dr. Tang Do on the benefits and multidimensional barriers of cross-border electricity initiative in Southeast Asia, and Mirza Huda on governance priorities and addressing the multidimensional challenges of the ASEAN power grid. Each presenters will be given 15 minutes to present their presentations, and then presentation sessions will be continued by a Q&A sessions for another 45 minutes to entertain some questions from our dearest participants. We will now hand over the sessions to our first speaker, Nadila Shani. Shani, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Benita, and good afternoon for all the participants that is joining. It's nice to see fellow speakers, familiar faces as well from the regions that we'll talk to in this webinar. So allow me to set the perhaps share some of the development in the ASEAN cooperation's perspective. If I may share my screen, or someone from the team will share. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, so again, my name is Shani. I'm the manager for the Power and Interconnections Department in ASEAN Center for Energy. And I'd like to guide all the participants to sort of like understand the status of the APG, what we are collaborating under the ASEAN framework right now. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just a sharing, if you are not aware of what ASEAN Center for Energy is, we are the intergovernmental organizations within the ASEAN structure that represents 10 ASEAN member states in the interest of in the energy sector. So we perform three roles basically, as a think tank, energy data and knowledge hub, and as well as catalyst to support any collaborations or cooperations under the ASEAN framework for the 10 member states. In doing so, we have what we call it as the APAEC, which is the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperations, which basically summarize what are the ASEAN countries are collaborating in several topics. One of them, we call it program area, is the ASEAN Power Grid. So basically, this APAEC serves as priorities. What are the ASEAN is cooperating in the next 5 years? So current APAEC guide us for the implementations of the cooperations from 2021 until 2025. And what are the things basically we need to tackle under the regional cooperations in the APG? So in the APG itself, the focus for the ASEAN cooperations is to advance the infrastructure, cross-border infrastructure and interconnections between the countries, and also how to utilize the existing and the future infrastructure to have more trade or cross-border trade between the countries. And we have also aspirational target to achieve as well for renewable energy. So how the APG could facilitate the cross-border renewable energy trading, basically. Next slide, please. So in the recent ASEAN Energy Outlook 8, I think Arif in the beginning also mentions that this region has a lot of renewable energy resources. And the premise is how to utilize renewable energy resources and sharing between countries, because there are some countries that has very abundant of renewable energy resources but low demand of electricity, but there are others that perhaps has a limitations on the resources but need a lot of electricity. So in the projections of our recent outlook, we see that the renewable energy will rise. So every country currently in ASEAN has a renewable energy target or climate target to achieve, and one way to achieve that in their national target is to work together with their neighbors in terms of how to utilize this renewable energy sharingly through a cross-border trade or interconnections. And under the ASEAN Interconnections Master Plan study that we estimated there are 130 gigawatt of solar and wind capacity that could be added up to 2040. And if we want to share, to have or to utilize this maximally within the regions, we foresee additional of 24.6 gigawatt interconnections capacity that we need to have in the regions. So the thing is how to actually implement this. We need to foster a high level commitment and regulatory alignment under the ASEAN cooperation framework between the countries, so that we could proceed with the development of the APG, so that the goal is to utilize or increase the renewable energy utilizations or cross-border trade. So it comes to the questions then, what are the key challenge basically in developing the APG? Next slide, please. So I think I just want to give a flavor to the audience here. What are basically the pain points and the enablers of the APG infrastructure development and the market mechanism basically. So if I just want to set the context that the APG infrastructure, what we mean by the ASEAN Power Grid is basically the cross-border interconnections between countries in the regions. So it means that APG is basically accumulated of those infrastructure where actually how those infrastructure implemented is between two countries. So APG is basically a stack of bilateral cooperations of the ASEAN countries in the regions. And there are also two types of the APG infrastructure that we are talking about. There are grid-to-grid interconnections, but also generations to grid. So there are some countries that establish, there are generations in one countries and then connected to the grid of other countries. So that's the generations to grid type of interconnections. And for developing those two, there are basically different challenges we see currently at the generations to grid type. It's easier because it's more straightforward in terms of there are less alignment that needs to be done, while for the grid-to-grid interconnections, there are multi-layers cooperations that needs to happen between the government and then to the stakeholders or the regulators itself up to the level of the utility to the utility. So if we reflect from the ASEAN perspective, what are the pain points? First is the high-level political commitment, especially for, I think it applies for both, for generations to grid type interconnections, but also to grid-to-grid interconnections. And why this is a pain point? Because unless the both countries understand the full benefit or the technical benefit why they should interconnect, this is the APG projects cannot move forward. So in order to make them in the same level of confidence of how establishing these cross-border interconnections is worthy to pursue, it requires a joint effort and resource sharing as well, especially in the explorations of these projects. So both countries need to assess basically technical and economical feasibility and what are the mutual benefits of having these cross-border interconnections. And this is where the roles of the ASEAN cooperation framework and ASEAN entities like ACE is matters and can influence and can support the countries in assisting them so that they have this understanding. The second one is the lack of strong regional mandate. So perhaps this is unique to other regional cooperations with other regions as well, where in ASEAN we are not top-down like EU. So making interconnections effort really depends on the bilateral trust and the shared needs of both between two countries. So in developing the APG, it means that while the regional cooperations get support, but the implementations of this will be under the ASEAN countries itself, where if they have a lot of joint effort together and build trust, it will move quite quickly. So the enablers, talking about the regional perspective and how we play a role, basically in tackling those two pain points, first, we support with under the regional cooperations framework to establish regional planning for these interconnections, basically to identify where are the potential of cross-border interconnections that can happen, and do a follow-up with the feasibility studies to support these countries. The second is basically to get the high level commitment from the highest or highest political will. We also support the country. I'm sorry, I hear like noises. Okay, now it's fine. The high level directives, we develop sort of like regional governmental agreement, high level agreement under the APG enhanced MOU, and there are also several ASEAN framework that we need to push, because some of these issues can be solved only on the regional level. For example, if there is any subsea development that needs to be built crossing different jurisdictions, I think this is difficult for country to country cooperation. It needs to be addressed in the regional level. So that's where ASEAN Center for Energy and ASEAN Secretariat play a significant role in helping APG and put the framework for the ASEAN to cooperate on this matter. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just to give you more explanations on the ASEAN Interconnections Master Plan Study, as this is one of the tools basically in the regions for the stakeholder and the governments to understand where are the potential opportunities of connecting with the neighbors needs to happen. So basically this is like a regional planning where because currently if you want to see opportunities where you can or is it feasible to to have interconnections with your neighbor, you need to plan your power planning perhaps with a higher level of scope, with a broader scope, not only your country, but also considering other country. So this is basically exercises that we do with the HAPUA, which is the head of power utility that comprises all 10 member states. So this is a regional planning to see whether if we optimize the resources that we have under the regions and the demand that will grow, then where are the interconnections that needs to happen? So currently what we have is the ASEAN Interconnections Master Plan Study 3, and which is finalized and established on 2020 with some updates in 2022. But this is the current mandate that we have under the cooperations is also to renew this because there are a lot of potential routes of interconnections that the country on the national level identifies. So while this tool is important, the most important thing is to continuously work on this with the utility and update it regularly so that it reflects the current dynamics as well of the ASEAN regions in terms of interconnections with the other neighbors. Next slide, please. Yeah, I mentioned the one of the biggest pain points is the high level commitment. So the one of the sort of like enablers is to have the intergovernmental agreements. Basically, what we have now is the APG MOU. This is will expire this year. So the ASEAN is working together to develop the new enhanced MOU on APG, where this MOU serve as the commitment of what are the 10 countries willing to coordinate and collaborate under the APG. And this is one of the Malaysia priority economic deliverables this year, as this is the Malaysian chairmanship. And hopefully this will serve as the sort of like agreement or commitment on how the ASEAN power grid can be developed, and most importantly, to give a directions where and what in what area the stakeholders need to collaborate in terms of advancing the APG. Next slide, please. Yeah. Just to give you example as well, because I think currently we have in ASEAN, we have three 3 gigawatt grid-to-grid cross-border interconnections and 5 gigawatt of generations to grid interconnections. And basically how to optimize this current existing interconnections is to facilitate more trade. And it's not only a bilateral trade that is potential between two countries, but with the region more interconnected, then we can explore to have multilateral power trade as well. So we have the Pathfinder projects of LTMS, Laos, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, PIP Phase 1, which is basically a unidirectional power trade that is Laos is trading the electricity all the way to Singapore, with Thailand and Malaysia as the willing countries. And the success of this pilot project is to basically to replicate in another area in the regions, which one of the nearest one or the potential one is the Borneo, to have the Borneo grid or under the BI and PPIP. So the goals is from the regions to push and optimize the current existing interconnections to optimize it fully so that it could facilitate more countries to trade powers, but also to replicate this and initiate this kind of framework to basically induce more interconnections to be built. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I think apart from that as well, I mentioned that beside the bilateral cooperations that need to happen, there are to advance the APG itself, there are a lot of regional coordinations and alignment that needs to happen. One of them that currently ASEAN is also working is on the subsea cable development framework, because there are more stakeholders that needs to be involved in this, not only perhaps the government of and the Ministry of Energy, but ministry that handles the that has authority on utilizing the water bodies as well. So if we want to have longer subsea interconnections, these things are challenged and technical, legal, and regulatory that needs to be addressed. Next slide, please. So yeah, just to conclude and perhaps to ignite the discussions later on, I think in ASEAN there are big opportunities in terms of we have abundant renewable energy resources and different electricity market profiles as well, with the different demand and different supply profile, which I think this is a potentials to explore and to collaborate. And APG, or the cross-border infrastructure, is the one that enables it. And the thing is, currently we have existing infrastructure as well, and in order to put forward a lot of infrastructure on cross-border infrastructure, there needs to be a market so enabled in terms of how we trade power with others. I think this is a lot of alignment that needs to be done, whether in a regional level or like national to or bilateral level. And the requirements for the APG development, I think there are the alignment that needs to happen is not only the technical but also regulatory and policy level. And on top of that, the political commitment is basically the one that propels or like open the gateway to it. So it's important that country to country progress bilaterally in their national level, but also how country leverage the framework or the ASEAN or regional platform that already established and optimize it to negotiate, to lobby, to discuss, because some of the challenges is something that needs to be addressed regionally, not nationally. So I think I'll stop there and looking forward for the discussions later on.
Thank you, Mbak Shani, for the comprehensive presentations. I will now hand over the next presentations to our colleague from the Australian National University, Dr. Tang Do, to present his findings on the benefits and multidimensional barriers in advancing the Regional Electricity Initiative. Dr. Tang Do, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here today to present the paper that we published 2 years ago on the topic of cross-border electricity trade in ASEAN. So thank you very much, the organizer, for inviting me. So I'm from the Australian National University. This project we conducted several years ago by reviewing literature on the cross-border electricity trade in the world, in many regions in the world, to see what experiences on this topic and also what could be learned from ASEAN for ASEAN. We also review documents within ASEAN member states, as well as the theory of subsequent policy. So we put together the theory, the practical experiences in some countries, in other regions, as well as in ASEAN, to come up with some findings that I'm going to share with you today. We'll move to the next slide. Okay, so today I will briefly again mention about the benefits of cross-border electricity trade, although our previous speakers have mentioned the benefits already, but I will elaborate more. Introduce you to the different types of electricity trade models. Briefly again, the status of the ASEAN cross-border electricity trade. And perhaps the key focus of my presentation today is the barriers toward the multilateral cross-border electricity trade in the region. And I also suggest some thoughts on how we could move forward. Okay, so we all know that cross-border electricity trade could bring about a lot of benefits. Right? First of all, the countries could save cost. Now, we did some modeling for the region, and we found out that if ASEAN have one integrated electricity market, that would save around 20% of the total electricity supply cost compared to individual electricity systems as currently we have. And important, the integrated electricity trade market would contribute to addressing climate change if the electricity traded comes from renewable, such as solar, wind, and hydro. And we learned from the first presenter that ASEAN is aiming high to increase the share of renewable power in the electricity mix. And one important way to do that is to have the regional electricity trade. So the solar produced in Vietnam or in Cambodia can be traded in Singapore, for example. So that's very important to have the regional trade in order to facilitate the development of solar and wind. Solar and wind don't happen everywhere at any time, all the time. Right? So we need to transfer between one place to the other in order to further develop solar and wind. And also we can enable the electricity access to remote areas, especially the cross-border areas, remote areas where it's very hard to provide electricity access for people living there. Now, we did a modeling on an ASEAN power grid for ASEAN. And we found that it's possible for ASEAN to have the integrated grid, and mainly because ASEAN regions have a lot of solar and wind. You know, the darker the color here you can see means that the more potential. Right? So here our region is here yellow, dark yellow, orange color, meaning that a lot of solar and wind as well. And importantly, ASEAN also has a lot of off-river pump hydro power storage potential. Now, those dots here are the potential pump hydro sites that we also did the map, and you people here did an atlas for the world potential for pump hydro, and this is a snapshot for ASEAN. So we have this potential to store the solar and wind generated. So it's very important. If we could integrate solar, wind, and the pump hydro energy storage in order to have the almost 100% renewable energy one system for Southeast Asia. So it's possible. Now, just briefly, we don't need much land, a very small part, the dot point here, that we could have sufficient solar to power the whole region. Yeah. So we have a whole large region, but only this area of land required for enough solar for us. And this is the wind atlas again. We have a lot of wind, especially offshore wind in Vietnam, Philippines here, okay, and some wind potential here, Indonesian and Australia here. And these are the off-river pump hydro energy storage potential sites. So they could support the solar and wind power systems well. Okay. This figure shows us the benefits in terms of the quantitative, so some figures. Now, here, this dot here is the total storage volume that we would need for the integrated electricity system for ASEAN. And this dot here is the volume that we would need if we have the super grid, meaning that the one grid. So we would need a smaller volume of the total storage compared with the individual country system. So less requirement for energy storage if we have interconnection. Okay, so here, the two figures on the bottom here. So this is the total electricity generation required for the whole region, and this number is the requirement we need if we have the super grid. So again, we would need the smaller amount of electricity if we have one electricity system for the region. And also, I would like you to pay attention to the two lines at the bottom here. This is the total system without interconnection, and this is with the interconnection. So we can see that this is the solar, right? The color here is solar. So without the one system, we have the majority is solar, but with this one, we could facilitate more wind. So we have solar, wind, so a better mix of solar and wind, and probably more reliable system. Okay, those are the modeling. And also the leverage cost of electricity, so the price. We would have the lower price of electricity generation here compared with the business as usual, right? So lower cost. So a lot of benefits if we have one system. Now, the next point here is the types of electricity trade that we could have. Now, the first the most simple one is bilateral, right, between the two countries. And the two countries can sell one way or two ways, right? And this happens a lot in the Mekong region between Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, and so on. The next one is multilateral, meaning that several countries. So Laos could export electricity to Malaysia and Singapore via Thailand, right? That the speakers have mentioned earlier. And these models also have been applied in Africa and quite successful in Southern African power core. Now, the next step of integration still within the multilateral group, but more harmonized, more integrated is the model that EU has. So it's a European Union internal energy market. A more advanced model is the North Pole, also in Europe and in Australia, where all the electron generated are used or traded somewhere else, right? For example, within the Australian national electricity market, the solar generated in Sydney could be used in Canberra if Canberra doesn't have solar power at that time. So instantly can be used without any intervention. So basically, this is the most advanced integrated electricity market model that could happen. And of course, the degree of integration and complexity increase if we move from bilateral to multilateral to unified, meaning that fully integrated power market. So let's see what have we done in terms of moving toward the integrated regional trade market. The cross-border electricity trade for electricity in 2022 accounts for only about 7% of the total electricity generated. So this is this index tells us how much is traded cross-border compared with the total generation. Now, if we look at the natural gas, coal, and other goods and services in ASEAN, we could see that trade in terms of electricity is very small, right? We trade a lot with many things, and energy, coal, natural gas here, we also trade a lot, but electricity just 7%. So there's room for us to increase this number. And the progress, we all know that the progress of ASEAN power grid, APG, have been slow, although the countries have been working very hard pushing it, but in the last 25 years or so, the progress has been slower than expected, than planned, and some projects have been delayed for several years, even a decade or so. So it's not easy. That's a key message that we all have learned so far. Not easy at all. Okay, so this is the detail of the projects that are planned and completed. About half so far have been completed. Now, perhaps this is the key point of my presentation. Let's have a closer look to the barriers to the cross-border electricity trade. Now, what are the key reasons for not being able to move as fast as we want to? The first one is the desire for self-sufficiency. And this could be associated with sovereignty and nationalism. Countries, of course, understandably would like to have the control over the energy, especially electricity, for economic growth. Right? And electricity is very important. We would not be able to do anything to listen to see each other now if we have power cut off, right? And sometimes when I work from home, if there's some technical needs for repairing the lines for 30 minutes or so, I could do nothing. No internet, no power, no computer, so I just have to take the break. So electricity is very important, and countries tend not to want to rely on external sources for this very important source of power for economic and other activities as well. These are examples, right? Singapore so far has relied mainly on imported LNG to power electricity generation because it provides more secure, more control over electricity generation. So it's not easy to convince policymakers to increase the electricity import ratio in the total electricity generation. We've also mentioned about the technical institutional barriers. Right? We have the vast regions and a lot of seas between countries, right? So it'll be quite costly to build the system to connect. And also diverse in terms of specification, protocols, transmission and distribution. And the trick here is that those are usually considered quite limited to share information. So people, again, understandably don't want to share publicly easily about those technification, because that would make them more exposed to risk. Actually, system is very important nowadays. So those information is very important. Another point is that the incumbent utilities, would they want to have the one market for the whole region? That's a big question, right? Because now with the current system, the utilities could have more control, more power in terms of how much to sell and at what price. If we have one system, then it is fully competitive market. The control, the power of the utilities will be much lower than currently. So that's another barrier that we need to be aware of. And also the difference between the electricity market structures among the countries. Singapore, Philippines have a competitive wholesale market, whereas Indonesia, Laos, Vietnam have more vertically structured, more centralized planned markets. So it takes efforts to harmonize between the electricity market structures. And I'm very happy to see the progress of the Laos, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore project, our trade project. That is very interesting example to look into more detail. Also, transaction cost in terms of completing this current system and dispute resolution and so on, because it involves many countries, so it's not easy to resolve if there's any dispute. And also, it's not easy to agree upon the cost sharing. Who should pay how much is not easy, because this is the common good, right? The system, the cable system would be shared, and just share benefits and costs are not easy to discuss. Also, if the electricity comes from coal power or hydropower that not managed well, then it could create environmental and social costs, and people who suffer from the damages of hydropower downstream, for example, may not be willing to support the project that provide electricity trade. So we've asked experts, including people like you, about their opinion. When will the ASEAN Power Grid be finished? And the majority said that it will be likely to finish after 2040. So not in the very near term future, meaning that we have a lot of work to do. Now, some key points we would like to highlight here, how we could move forward. As our previous speaker mentioned, and I totally agree, we need strong political and social support. Without this one, it would be very, very difficult. If we just work at the technical level, I think that it would be very, very difficult to move forward. We need the strong support from presidents, from prime ministers, and also we need social support as well in order to gain the political approval and push for the system to move forward. Now, the next point I would like to highlight here is that perhaps we should focus on bilateral trade at the moment, because bilateral means two countries, it will be much easier to negotiate and agree if we have two parties involved only. And the example of the Laos, Malaysia, Thai, Malaysia, Singapore is very good one that we should learn more. Oh, I think that's perhaps the two key points I would like to share. Now, some recent example that quite encouraging. Within ASEAN, we have the ASEAN Power Grid, but here we have also very big project selling electricity from Australia. Right? So this is the Northern Territory, Australia. So solar and wind power will be generated here and will be transferred to over 4,000 kilometers subsea cable to Singapore. And so this is a very big project. It started about 7 years ago. It experienced a lot of hiccups within the internal stakeholders. People didn't agree about whether to sell electricity here or to convert electricity to hydrogen and sell, right? But now, as of now, people have agreed to sell electricity. And Singapore has approved the project for the initial phase. Australia also cleared environmental protection for this area. So now the project is in the mobilizing funding, and that hopefully will end in about 3 years' time, and it will start construction and plans to provide electricity to Singapore around 2035. So that's the plan. That's a big project, and it's quite encouraging. An example of cross-border electricity between Australia and ASEAN. Within the ASEAN countries, there are some examples between Vietnam, Singapore, between Vietnam, Laos, between Cambodia and Singapore, between Singapore and Indonesia, in terms of the projects for electricity trade, but those are initial only. Okay, so these are conclusions. We would benefit a lot, especially increasing the renewable energy rate, if we would have the cross-border electricity trade. But in order to do that, it's very important to have high-level political support. And for now, perhaps focus on bilateral trade and step by step move toward more parties involved would be the way for us to go. So I would end my presentation here, and I think we'll have more time to discuss later. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Tang, for the insightful findings that you presented to us. I believe that presentations from Mbak Shani and also Dr. Tang will already ignite some questions that we can follow up later. But before into our Q&A sessions, we will now have our last speaker, Mirza Huda, who will be presenting the governance priorities and addressing the challenges of the ASEAN power grid. Mirza, the time is yours.
Great. Thank you so much. So I would just like to start off by saying hello to my friends from ACE and ANU and my new friends from ISR. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to contribute to this very important discussion. So my name is Mirza. I work at the Climate Change in Southeast Asia program of the IC's Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore. And we do a lot of work on energy transition. Recently, we've been focusing quite a bit on the ASEAN power grid. So we did a report on the LTMS PIP, which was mentioned by the previous speakers, and published it in 2023. And this report essentially was it was drafted through extensive field work in Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, and Laos. So we used data from interviews with policymakers to really find out what drove the success of the LTMS. And this presentation here is not just a representation of that particular report, but it also aims to provide an update on the new challenges following the LTMS and now with the subsea cables and BIMP, PIP, what are the new challenges we are facing and how do we address them? So next slide, please. So I think both our previous speakers have spoken about the LTMS. So essentially, this is a project that started out in 2022. Before that, it was the LTM. So Laos, Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore subsequently joined. And the LTMS PIP is, as mentioned by Shani, the pathfinder. So a very important project that essentially shows us not only the best practices in driving the ASEAN power grid, but also some of the challenges that we can essentially address as we move forward with projects like the BIMP, PIP, or subsea cables. And the LTMS essentially has two phases. So phase one was between 2022 to 2024. And this involved the transfer of hydropower from Laos through the Thai grid, through the Malaysian grid, and then into Singapore. And the second phase started out in 2024, and it will go until 2026. And for the second phase, electricity trade was actually increased to 200 megawatts, and Malaysia also started providing electricity. Next slide, please. So our research essentially tried to find out what the success factors are for the LTMS PIP. And both Shani and Dr. Tang mentioned the issue about politics, political endorsement and how important it is. And if you look at literature on energy cooperation from any region, whether it be Southeast Asia, Central Asia, or South Asia, the recommendation is that you must have higher levels of political will. But there is no understanding of what political will actually is, right? So what LTMS has done is actually shown us what political will is and how to actually assert political will in the context of ASEAN. So what really drove the LTMS PIP is consistent political endorsement. So the APG has been mentioned as a facilitator of regional integration and prosperity at the highest level, so at the ASEAN Summit. And it has also been endorsed repeatedly by the ASEAN Ministers on Energy meeting, which essentially is the highest policymaking body of energy integration in the region. So between the 32nd to the 41st AMM, and this is a meeting that's held every year, the LTMS PIP was mentioned in every meeting. So for a period of 9 years, from 2014 to 2023, the LTMS was endorsed by the AMM. And the LTMS and the broader vision of the APG was also discussed at high-level meetings between the members of between Southeast Asian countries. So this include foreign ministry level meetings and also meetings between premiers of states and leaders in other Southeast Asian countries. So it has been consistently endorsed and supported. Next slide, please. And through our fieldwork data, we also found out that policymakers believe that the governance mechanism of the LTMS was one issue that really drove the success of the project. So the LTMS is essentially driven by the working group, which includes very high-level policymakers and bureaucrats. And under the working group are 4 task forces. And each task force was allocated to a country, which really gave a sense of ownership, and it provided responsibility and stake in driving through the project. And this sort of mechanism also allowed different countries to join at different times. So this allowed Singapore to join later. And there was also a concerted effort to use this mechanism to facilitate communication. So we learned that there is an online communication mechanism for the LTMS. which really facilitates real-time communication between the bureaucrats and the technocrats who are driving this project. And this certainly can be a model for new projects moving forward. Next slide, please. And the final success factor, and this is not something we actually learned from our field work, because we didn't really realize or understand how the second phase would take place, is the issue of modularity. And modularity is essentially a fancy word, which means doing things step by step and retaining the ability to scale up. So if you look at literature on energy mega projects, you will see that one of the recommendations by scholars such as Professor Flivberg, who is an expert on energy mega projects, is that for energy projects to work, they must be implemented quickly, and they must have the ability to scale up according to the situation, according to the initial kind of project development. So this is done quite efficiently in the case of LTMS. So we started out with a trade of 100 megawatts, which was unidirectional. And then once the technical issues, etc., were smoothened out further, we moved on to the second phase, where energy trade was increased, and it became a multi-directional initiative, with Malaysia also transferring electricity to Singapore. And maybe in the future, we will see more upgrades in the LTMS PIP project. So Singapore and Malaysia has already upgraded their interconnections. So we can see more development in the LTMS PIP in the future, following the end of the second phase in 2026. Next slide, please. And there are also certain challenges of the LTMS PIP, one of which is the limited technical capacity. So the interconnection between Thailand and Malaysia has not been upgraded yet. I think there's still negotiations ongoing, and hopefully if that interconnection is upgraded, then it will free up more options for how we can expand the LTMS. And there's also a lack of consensus on the effectiveness of wheeling charges. So wheeling charges essentially are the costs paid by a country for using a third party's grid. And in this case, Laos would pay wheeling charges to Thailand and to Malaysia. And we found through our conversations that some stakeholders feel that the wheeling charges are too high, which discourages energy trade, while some feel that it's too low, which does not encourage investment in the grid itself. So we need to find some kind of consensus on the wheeling charges for energy trade in ASEAN. And the other issue is the impact of climate change on the availability of water for hydropower generation. We saw the impact of El Nino on hydropower generation in Laos, and I believe also in Cambodia. And this can become a real issue moving forward. And we already see this issue impacting hydropower generation in Laos. Next slide, please. So that's essentially the overview of the LTMS PIP. But now we are at a brave new world of interconnection. It is a different context. And this doesn't mean that the lessons learned from the LTMS PIP are not relevant. They certainly are. But we also must adjust to new realities. So Southeast Asia has set off on a very ambitious integration project, the BIMP PIP, Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines Power Integration Project, which is set to be the region's second multilateral project. And this will be a game changer for the region because it essentially combines overland cables with subsea cables. So it helps address the energy gap between continental Southeast Asia and maritime Southeast Asia. But there are multiple challenges we also need to address in implementing this project. Currently, it's at the feasibility stage. And once the Borneo grid, the grid between Sarawak, Sabah, and Kalimantan is finalized, hopefully it can be extended to the Philippines and we will see rapid progress. Next slide, please. And as Dr. Thang Nam Do and Shani mentioned, there are multiple subsea cable projects being considered in Southeast Asia. They're at various stages of being negotiated and also under feasibility study. And these projects are very important for the ASEAN power grid because although they are bilateral, they provide a certain sense of diversity. So not just diverse sources of energy for energy importers, but also diverse sources of markets for energy exporters like Vietnam, like Cambodia. And this can create an added sense of security and stability while we pursue broader projects, more complex projects like the BIMP PIP or perhaps the extension of the LTMS PIP. So these projects are bilateral, but I believe they still have a very important role to play in kind of facilitating multilateral cooperation. Next slide, please. So this new kind of environment with subsea cables with the BIMP PIP is faced with a plethora of challenges, and they are contemporary challenges and rapidly changing. And for the presentation today, I have divided the challenges into three categories: political, technical, and institutional. And I will also try to provide some policy recommendations in terms of how to use energy governance to address these challenges. So in terms of political issues, first is geopolitics, and then is the issue of resource nationalism, which was also mentioned by Dr. Thang Nam Do, and the issue about political priorities changing and how it impacts long-term energy projects. So currently with the second Trump administration, we really see a change in the geopolitics of the energy transition, whether it comes to critical minerals, whether it comes to cross-border grids or energy investment in the region. We are facing a plethora of challenges that are constantly evolving. One example is US aid, which played a very big role in energy transition in Southeast Asia, particularly the ASEAN power grid. So the US aid had actually undertaken a number of feasibility studies on subsea cables, and it's also provided training and facilitated workshops on energy transition, which were quite valuable. So with the closing down of US aid, the ASEAN countries really need to come together and kind of discuss and find out who are the different types of stakeholders who can continue to play a constructive role in the energy transition of the region, because energy transition and energy security is always about diversity. And it's not just about diversity of sources, but also diversity of partners. So we are faced with this challenge of lack of diverse partners, which we need to collectively address as a region. And there's also the issue about the geopolitics of subsea cables, whether it be great power politics, supply chain issues, or various conflicts related to the waterways through which the subsea cables will go through. And once again, this would require regional cooperation and collective action. And in regard to the resource nationalism issue mentioned by Dr. Thang, this is a real challenge. Because in Southeast Asian countries, there is a perception that existing renewable energy resources should be used for the country itself, for domestic consumption. And this can have a negative impact on investment and regional transition. We saw a couple of years back that some regional countries had banned the export of renewable energy, which was subsequently revoked. But we need to find out some kind of communication strategy, some kind of outreach, grassroots interaction that can help present the ASEAN power grid as a facilitator of sustainable development for the masses, really, and not just something that is driven and conceptualized by the elites. So this can be through journalism, through media outreach, through education, because we really need to find sustainable means of countering resource nationalism. And lastly, in Southeast Asia, there is an issue of consistency when it comes to political support for certain projects. And unfortunately, the ASEAN Power Grid, as shown by Dr. Thang Nam Do's slide, can take a very, very long time. And the average HVDC cable project can take up to 15 years. And we're talking about billions of dollars of investment. So we really need long-term energy contracts and sustained political support for some of these projects that are being conceptualized at this point in time. Next slide, please. So in terms of technical challenges, there's a huge gap in finance in Southeast Asia. And there's also some level of difficulties in forming a regional financing framework. And one method of addressing this issue is to develop the ASEAN projects of common interest, which is essentially, can be a copy of the European projects of common interest, which is a list of backbone projects in the European Union that can really accelerate the energy transition. And these projects are essentially shortlisted for rapid finance and rapid development. So we can consider developing something like this in ASEAN, and we can draw upon the list of important projects highlighted by the AIMS ASEAN Interconnection Master Plan study and the very important kind of scholarship undertaken by the ASEAN Center for Energy as well. And we need to develop a regional and transparent wheeling charge methodology. As I mentioned previously, the LTMS PIP experience shows that there are some concerns regarding the wheeling charges being used. And if we can have a transparent formula for developing regional wheeling charges, this can be done through a consultative process, and there would be a much higher level of acceptance. And there are various international examples we can follow. So for example, the Southern African Power Pool has a methodology and a formula that is publicly available. So the actual wheeling charge does not need to be made available because that can have some commercial interest attached to it. But if the formula is available, then perhaps there can be more acceptance of wheeling charges in the region. And lastly, we really need to undertake more studies and more workshops on subsea cables because these are new projects. And of course, they will have many benefits, and we need to create greater awareness of these benefits. And if there are some challenges, those should also be discussed. Next slide, please. And lastly is the issue of institutional and capacity challenges. So right now in Southeast Asia, we don't have an institution that is the equivalent of the Nordic Power Pool or the NSOE in Europe. So this is actually holding back the pace of our integration. So we can consider developing a regional institution that can drive long-term energy planning and facilitating market integration, and also administering a dispute resolution mechanism at the regional level, because these are all things that can really accelerate the ASEAN power grid and also the uptake of renewable energy in the region. And there are also different kind of resources and reports that point to the supply chain constraints and manpower constraints of developing subsea cables in Southeast Asia. So we need to kind of understand what role the region's manpower can play in developing subsea cables. How do we train them? What kind of technical skills do we need to develop? Because of course, the region's workforce need to play an important role in developing these projects, and we wouldn't want this project to only be driven by external workforces. Although there must be some kind of collaboration and training and capacity building with international stakeholders, but to really facilitate long-term kind of skill development, we also need to understand how we can build the capacity of the regional workforces. And lastly, we kind of need to understand that the ASEAN power grid is not an end in itself. So it's only a means to an end. And the end is always just transition. So whether we are considering subsea cables or overland cables, they are just instruments, and the final result that we seek to achieve is just transition and the socioeconomic development and the economic and environmental well-being of our region. And so to do that, we can refer to some regional just transition frameworks, such as the one developed by the ASEAN Center for Energy, called the Guide to a Just and Inclusive Energy Transition in ASEAN. And we can refer to these guidelines and these policy checklists as we develop the ASEAN Power Grid to keep in mind the broader goal that we're trying to achieve through the development of these interconnections. Next slide, please. So that's essentially my presentation. I will share the report with you in the chat group and look forward to the conclusion and the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our speakers, and we will now jump into the Q&A sessions. I believe our participants here already have some burning questions from the presentations, and participants can now already type in their questions or raising hands. While we are waiting for questions from participants, I have one follow-up questions before I turn to questions from our esteemed participants. And these questions that I have is to Dr. Tamdo and Mirza in my first questions. I was reading your article, Dr. Tamdo, and I found a very intriguing part in which you said that ASEAN electricity cooperation has followed ASEAN mode of governance, which is characterized largely by informal institutional cooperation with non-binding consequences. And regional government often prefer to discuss and agree on general points instead of complex issues relating to long-term projects. And we know that regional electricity here is a long-term project, actually. So what is your take on that? With the unique characteristic of ASEAN, how optimistic are you seeing in this Malaysian chairmanship this year that regional government will once again agree on the continuation of this regional electricity project?
Thank you, Benita. A very interesting question. And not easy to answer satisfactorily, but let me try. I'm optimistic, and I really like Dr. Huda's suggestions of some ways to move forward in addition to what I mentioned. For example, Dr. Huda mentioned about the list of priority projects within ASEAN. Right? I think that's a very important idea. Although ASEAN usually follow the bottom-up approach, basically voluntary actions, we could create some priority lane for very important projects. And once we have agreed upon the importance of the ASEAN Power Grid, for example, I think we could find ways to accelerate it. So I'm optimistic, just a matter of convincing the policymakers the importance of the project. That's my initial response. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tam. Perhaps I'm also intrigued to understand from the perspective from Mirza.
Thanks, Benita. I am also optimistic. And also because the Malaysian chairmanship is very important for energy transition. If you look at the LTMS and the LTM, it was essentially driven by Malaysia. It played a very important role in the LTM. And Malaysia can potentially take the experience from the LTM and the LTMS to the BIMP PIP, because the common factor between the LTMS PIP and the BIMP PIP is Malaysia. So certainly optimistic about what the Malaysian chairmanship can achieve in terms of energy transition, cross-border grids. The National Energy Transition Roadmap of Malaysia is quite a comprehensive and evolving document. And Malaysia is also considering how to deal with future energy scenario if it develops the data centers, which can have a very large impact on energy demand. So it needs to address some of its domestic issues, but also it has quite ambitious regional programs, including the subsea cables. So there is a consideration of subsea cables from Sarawak to Singapore. Also, Peninsular Malaysia is planning to develop a subsea cable between itself and Sumatra in Indonesia. So there's a lot happening, and there are challenges. But if, for instance, the ASEAN projects of common interest can be initiated, and if it's done in a way that is consultative and takes into account the different opinions and perceptions and concerns of the 10 ASEAN member states, I think it will be quite beneficial. And as Dr. Thang Namdo mentioned, we really need to do it in a bottom-up approach. So we need to do it in a consultative manner, which is rooted within the political and socioeconomic context of Southeast Asia. Thank you.
Thank you, Mirza, for the answers, and also Dr. Tang. A gentle reminder for our participants. We are still waiting for your questions. While we are waiting, I also have another follow-up questions for all of our speakers, but perhaps I can start with Mbak Shani. So I agree that among several barriers, the political barriers has often received inadequate attentions. So far, most of the discussions have been surrounding around the issues of financial barriers and sometimes also technical barriers. So, do you see any progress from the ASEAN chairmanship this year from the Malaysia in how they will likely overcome these political barriers and to win the political consensus on this electricity connections, the regular electricity connections?
Thank you, Benita, for the questions. And yes, I think on the political, I think that the heavy lifting one. And basically, under the Malaysian chairmanship this year, I'm also optimistic because a lot of important point or levers to enable the further cooperations under the APG is basically priorities of the current Malaysian chairmanships. For example, the APG MOU, enhanced MOU, I think that's aimed to be signed under this year, under the Malaysian chairmanship. Not only that, there are supporting frameworks that will be discussed as well. For example, like the TOR of the subsea development framework. Also, on the REC framework, renewable energy certificate regional framework, which basically the market levers, I would say, in order to make the cross-border renewable energy compelling, we need to have that framework. I think that's also part of the priorities that Malaysian chairmanship wants to lead as well for the output this year. So I think there are a lot of, and for sure, I think if to relate what Malaysia is progressing under the national level as well, on their policy level, they establish or like publish several important framework, especially for the cross-border energy trading energy scheme and the ENEGEM recently, which is the exchange platform between Malaysia and Singapore and Malaysia to Thailand. I think a lot of happening inside Malaysia as well that perhaps could help and then championing the development of the ASEAN Power Grid, especially on enabling policy framework and market mechanism that perhaps in the national level, this is important as Malaysia sits on between the different countries. There's also a willing to trade power. So I think that's my question, my answers for that.
Thank you, Mbak Shani. Perhaps, Mirza, do you have any take on that?
I think Shani has answered the question really well. So
Okay,
yeah, no more comments from me at this point in time.
I see. Dr. Tangdo, would you like to add something?
I don't have more to add.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we are still waiting for questions from our dearest participants. While we are still waiting, I have another follow-up questions. We do understand that based on a report from ACE that the ASEAN renewable energy share stood at 15.6%, which is quite slow, and progress has been quite slow. Um, do you think that the ASEAN Power Grid, how do you see that ASEAN Power Grid has really contributed into the increasing share in renewable energy, regional renewable energy so far? And do you see that the continuation of this regional grid connectivity will enhance the renewable energy share of Southeast Asia in the future?
I think there is a yes and no on answering that questions. First, I think if we look closer on the renewable energy target that we put in the regions, our aspirational target is on the total primary energy supply, which is not only the electricity sector or power sector, but also other sectors as well. So I think while our target is 23% by 2025, and I think we are still like 2/3 of it at the moment. So I think while we have put a lot of efforts on putting renewable energy in the power sector, I think there are untapped sort of like opportunities on doing more renewables, especially for transport and other sectors as well, transport and then industry as well. But I think for sure that in the electricity sector, we can do much more in making renewable energy increase or shares, and surely APG will do that. So I think in order for the regions to really achieve this target, which I think reflected to the national target as well, we need to perhaps put more efforts in building this interconnection so that we could maximize the effort on the electricity side, but also beyond that, I think in transport and other, it's effort needs to be also double. Well, I think there is a significant increase as well on the transport to also electrify the transport sector, more EVs and etc., where I think it's also putting our contributions on increasing these renewables shares in the regions.
Thank you, Mbak Shani. Any other additional thoughts on that from Mirza or Dr. Tang?
Well, I do agree with what Shani mentioned. We need to think about total primary energy supply. But if we kind of look at different modeling studies, such as those done by IEA on how the ASEAN power grid can accelerate transition and the uptake of renewables, we do see significant contributions provided that certain policy measures are in place. So with the APG, we can exploit economies of scale. We can also address the issue of the intermittent nature of solar and wind energy by tapping into different sources. And we can also exploit the differences in peak demand times between Southeast Asian countries. And in terms of the grid itself, interconnection does enhance the stability of grids. So I'm referring to studies done by ASEAN, IRENE, and IEA here. And a very recent study by DNV actually shows that the ASEAN power grid can help save the costs of decarbonization by something around 800 billion. So, of course, that would only happen if we go full force with decarbonization. If we do it a bit more slowly, then this cost savings doesn't really count. But according to technical information out there, the APG is certainly very beneficial for the environment and energy security.
Thank you, Mirza, for the additional thoughts on that. I am now turning to questions from our participants. From Risman Sinambela. I hope I pronounce it correctly. Having two questions for our presenters. How prepared are ASEAN countries in terms of regulatory frameworks and energy policies to support regional electricity integrations? And the second question, are there disparities in energy capacity and capability among ASEAN member states that could hinder the success of cross-border electricity initiatives? Thank you, Risman, for the questions, and I will now hand over to our presenters for answering the questions. Maybe Dr. Tan wants to start first.
Yes, thank you. And I'd like to answer the second question. I am not aware of major barriers coming from the disparities in energy capacity and capability among the ASEAN members. I am more aware and more concerned about the political, technical, financial, institutional barriers that we have mentioned today. So in brief, the differences between capacity, energy capacity and capability are not the barriers, but could be as opportunities, because the fundamental benefit of trade is complementary advantages. So if Singapore needs energy, electricity, but it doesn't have sufficient land, sea, solar, wind, it can import from where there's a bundle of solar, for example, Indonesia, right? So I'm not aware of that barrier. Thank you. And perhaps other speakers could help me more with the other question and this one as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Tang. Perhaps Mbak Shani or Mirza can answer the first question or the second one.
Yeah, I think I'd like to take the first one. In terms of preparedness of the regulatory frameworks and energy policies, I think every jurisdiction has their own sort of like rules on their electricity market and how it's structured. And I just want to highlight that basically, in order to have a cross-border trade, I think the adjustment needs to happen so that the buyer and seller could interact. So I think in order to enable that, essentially there are needs to to have adjustment between two different sort of like markets international, how they connect, and then how to enable basically a framework for them to trade powers. So I think there are there is a needs to be adjustment alignments between the two countries, how from the others they can buy or sell powers, so that enables wider sort of like seller and buyer from the two markets. While it's from my personal view, it's not necessary that all of the things on the market rules and regulatory frameworks needs to be aligned between those two countries. It's just that how they open this so that they can trade cross-borderly. So in that sense, in a simple way, for example, currently Singapore has liberalized market, while Malaysia is sort of like a single buyer model. So it's not necessary that Malaysia needs to also have liberalized market for the buyer and seller in those countries to interact. That's not the point of the alignment. The alignment is only how Malaysia and Singapore works together in terms of how to enable so that their market players between those countries could interact. So it's not necessarily that. I think this is also misconceptions. If we want to make a more sort of like integrated market, it means that everyone needs to liberalize. I think every own jurisdictions has their status and their pathways as well. Not necessarily, so liberalizations or changes are not necessarily prerequisite for cross-border trading to happen. It's just that on that tip, on that border, on how to make a regulatory alignment so that the market actors could interact. So I think that's the point, perhaps, that I want to provoke within the audience.
Thank you, Mbak Shani, for the very interesting perspective here. Mirza, would you like to add some thoughts on these two questions?
Yes, thanks, Benita. I fully support what Shani and Dr. Thanamdo said, particularly in the context of what Shani mentioned about not needing to have a fully liberalized market in every country. And this kind of goes back to the more important point of how we can't really copy and paste, recommendations from other regions. We can't replicate the European market in Southeast Asia because the context is very different. And LTMS shows that we can collaborate and we can trade despite differences in our markets. But at the same time, we also need to try and understand how we can address these issues a little bit better. And there are some progress in terms of third-party access, third-party wheeling charges, increases in independent power producers participating in the market. Vietnam has recently opened up its grid for investment by private actors, of course, with limitations and considerations. So yes, it's not necessarily that we need to kind of look at places outside the region and say this is the only way it would work. And in terms of the issue that Dr. Thanamdo mentioned, I agree that political and technical issues are, of much more importance when it comes to energy trade. And the disparities in energy capacity and capability, I don't think it's necessarily an impediment. It could be like a justification, if you like to look at things from the other side of the coin, it could be a justification for greater cooperation. So one example is that Peninsular Malaysia may not necessarily have as much hydropower capacity as Sarawak, as East Malaysia. So that would actually justify a subsea cable, And some parts of Indonesia may have very high levels of solar capacity, but not necessarily the population or the industrial base to have a high level of demand. So that actually creates opportunities for investments in grids.
Thank you, Mirza, for the insightful answer that you provided to us. We are now heading to the last questions, I believe. Uh, from City Virus, if cross-border electricity trading expands, how will ASEAN prevent price distortions when some nations, for example, Malaysia, Indonesia, still heavily subsidize domestic power? That is quite interesting questions. Would like to start first from our three speakers.
Yeah, I think I have opinions on that because I think this is also relates to the sort of the challenges of making a cross-border interconnections as well, is how to finance it. So I think fro from the policymakers or the government's perspective, they want to, if they want to have a cross-border interconnections, they need to be convinced, right? Like this is best first, if this is beneficial for the country, and what are the implications for the country. So I think in increasing to achieve that kind of confidence and decisions to pursue this, it's also the questions how to finance it, because I think the mostly the cross-border interconnections currently, which is grid to grid, is under the utility to utility connections arrangement, so that it's also limited as well in terms of how it's going to be financed. And I know that if that's from the utility to utility, then that's the debate of should we prioritize this or like prioritize the development of the internal transmissions, because then it's using like public funds and public sort of like financing models. So I think if we want to accelerate the APG, I think the countries need to also think about how to look different innovative business models of the transmissions, which I think currently very influenced by how the electricity market is structured as well. Transmissions business basically in most of the regulated market, it's still regulated and under the utility or the TSO sort of like scope, which very limited models that allows the participations of the private. So I think that's the sort of like a further step for the countries to take. So if we are how to enable basically a financing mechanism or business model to ensure the revenue of this cross-border interconnections, because mostly for the regulated market, it's still very limited options.
Thank you, Mbak Shani. Mirza or Dr. Spando wants to go next?
Yes, I agree with Shani's point. I think that there are many steps that we would need to undertake, and I would think about simple steps first. So if we could start with bilateral trade, meaning that two countries, it will be much easier. So the two countries can agree upon the price that they want to buy and sell at, without having to concern about the subsidies for the electricity tariff of the national systems. All of the other countries, I mean, many of the other countries have some subsidies for electricity tariff. I think Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, Laos, and so on. Perhaps only Philippines and Singapore may not much. So separating the electricity sold, used domestically with the electricity traded cross-border first. And then later we could amend other regulations to harmonize the markets so that we could move forward more. But I would think about the basic steps, separate them, do bilateral first, business to business first before we think about the integrated whole system. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pham. Last statement from Mirza.
Thanks, Benita. I just wanted to mention that things like the market structure, subsidies are essentially the prerogative of national governments, but they do influence regional cooperation. So that's where, the tricky bit lies, you don't want national governments to undertake reform that don't necessarily meet their own interests. So as Dr. Tang Nando mentioned, we can try deregulation at the bilateral level, provided that these are acceptable to the broader public, because energy transition also entails issues like short-term price increases and things like that we need to keep in mind. In terms of subsidies, which is, I believe, another issue that was mentioned in the question, subsidies do have an impact on the level of investment in renewable energy, but we don't necessarily have to do away with all subsidies, but we can consider having more targeted subsidies to ensure that those who are actually in need are the ones receiving the subsidies. So energy market regulation and deregulation or market liberalization are, of course, very complex, very important issues tied to socioeconomic development and the political context in national countries of Southeast Asia. But we must also kind of slowly discuss these issues at the regional level to try and find out how we can move forward to greater levels of market integration.
Thank you, Mirza. Unfortunately, we are running out of time now. I thank all of our speakers and participants for the fruitful discussion this afternoon. We are now approaching to the very last sessions of this webinar, which is the conclusions and closing. For these last sessions, I will hand over back to our MC, Taskia. Taskia, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Benita. As we come to the end of today's webinar, let's take a moment to reflect on the key insights shared by our esteemed speaker. We explore cross-border electricity coverage, and from the presentation, regional cross-border electricity trade offers significant benefits, including cost saving, improved energy access, and reduced emission through increased uptake of renewable power. However, realizing this benefit requires addressing key challenges related to security, grid integration, and political, economic, and technical coordination areas that demand our continued support and cooperation, especially on geopolitical and social support, to strengthen bilateral trade and pave the way to regional integration. I have a thank you to our speakers, Nadila Shani, Dr. Tengdo, and Misa Huda, for their invaluable contribution, as well as to all our attendees for your participation and engagement. We encourage you to stay connected and continue the conversation and apply the knowledge gained today. On behalf of Institute for Essential Services Reform, we truly appreciate your time and participation. We look forward to seeing you at our future session. Have a great day.